今天晚上可以，
下了月，
哎，
以上公布是
等到 internet 看得到。
internet 了 WiFi 也会背我的上的，所以你们的那么的真的是出国了吧？麦克上也会有 camera。
哦，这是。
webcam 的麦克上也会有。
哦，这是。
现在西北呢，等到的有开始了，出这些当然给的就是 UPS。
哦。
no。
A very good morning to one and all. I warmly welcome you to Day 2 Symposium on Attention, Awareness and Consciousness. This session will help us in understanding the complex yet intimate relationship between attention, awareness and consciousness. We have distinguished speakers addressing the topic from 3 different perspectives, that is yoga, Buddhism and neuroscience. And I'm honored to introduce the Venerable Geshe-la Dorji Damdul, who will be chairing the session. Venerable Geshe-la is a distinguished Buddhist scholar whose interest lies in the relationship between Buddhism and science, especially in physics. He obtained his Geshe Larampa degree, a traditional degree which is equivalent to doctorate in divinity, in 2002 from Diprang Losling Monastic University. In 2003, recommended by the office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Geshe-la studied English at Cambridge University, England. He has been the official translator of His Holiness the Dalai Lama since 2005 and currently is the director of Tibet House, the cultural center of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, which is based in New Delhi, India, where he teaches the Buddhist philosophy, psychology, logic, and practice every week. He was one of the chief editors for the textbook on Buddhist science and philosophy. He is also actively involved in critically editing books of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, like The Graded Path, Ethics for New Millennium, Art of Happiness, etc. He has written a number of important papers for national and international conferences. He is in the process of writing 2 important books, one on the journey into paradox of brain and mind, and the other is What Constitutes the Ultimate Reality, the Effects of Understanding the Ultimate Reality. Geshe-la's knowledge of science and interactions with world-renowned scientists give him the unique ability to teach Buddhist philosophy with a modern twist. I now request the Venerable Geshe-la to lead the session. Over to you, Geshe-la.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a great honor that Center for Consciousness Studies under the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences is organizing this program, and it has many series like symposiums and keynote lectures and so forth. And this symposium particularly given that there are 3 very prominent speakers and who are really expert, not just on the being in this discipline, but they are very expert for all these many years in their own disciplines. And the topic for today is attention, awareness, and consciousness. And in this regard, first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Bindu Guruji, the chairperson of the Center for Consciousness Studies, and also Dr. Ravindra Naganarji, the organizing secretary of this conference, and the Dr. Suma for being the main moderator here. And I think that this conference, particularly organized by NIMHANS, National Institute for Mental Health and Neurosciences, is extremely significant for the reason that the NIMHANS is one of the most important centers pertaining to dealing with the mental health in India. And in this regard, the topic here, the attention, awareness, and consciousness, this topic is extremely heavy, and also that is extremely important, and there can be a lot of ambiguities involved for the reason that the particularly the concept of consciousness. And this at the center is the Center for Consciousness. And we know that there are three speakers from three different traditions. And particularly, I warn the speakers as well as the audience when they use the word conscious, particularly consciousness. Awareness is okay. Attention, it is more generally accepted with the same meaning. But for consciousness, this has great ambiguity there. And in the first place, we have to know that some of the traditions, they refer to consciousness as the being, the self, the soul, and so forth. Whereas in some other traditions, they refer to it as some kind of mind or the conscious, the empirical conscious reality, the experience, and so forth. And so we see that the same word, while the three different speakers speak on what they refer to, the other speakers, the remaining two speakers, I request you to please, first of all, try to understand what the other person is referring to. Number one. Number two, that the audience, I also like to bring it to your notice and attention that when somebody speaks of the consciousness or uses the word consciousness, don't take for granted that this is what is meant by how you interpret the word consciousness. So even the participants and the audience must make it a point that what these speakers are referring to when they use the word consciousness, attention, and awareness is extremely important for the audience to, in order to really enjoy and reap the maximum benefit out of these three speakers and the presenters. It's so important that we need to know what they are referring to when they use the particular the technical terms. In this connection, why I'm being very precise with this is that, number one, this is not a religious conference. This is a conference organized by NIMHANS, a very prestigious, reputed institution, a National Institute of Mental Health and Neuroscience, where all the researches, the scientific researches are being done pertaining to the brain. And for this reason, that we should keep in mind, the audience, we should keep in mind that this is not a religious meeting here. And although the religious scholars are presenting this, but it must somehow come out with the language of the neuroscience. This is so important, because that finally what we are speaking is in line with the researches and the basic agendas of Center for Consciousness Studies under the NIMHANS, National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences. So because of this, the participants, we can make the most of these three presentations, provided if you're able to, one, see this in the light of the, say, the academic, the ambience, and the academic flavor, the feel. So that's very important. And then the part as to the consciousness. Why I'm working on this or talking about it too much is for the reason that the consciousness, this is, in the first place, this is an English word. This is not an Asian word. This is not the word coined by the Buddhist or the different traditions, Hinduism or Sikhism, Jainism, and so forth. This is an English word. And this English word, they want to check it. It came from the Latin word, the conscia, and then changed to conscious, and then changed to conscious. So there, it has the connotation of knowing, privy, and being aware. So these are the meanings in the original English, but the India and in Asia, incredibly rich thoughts were developed and the different, they say, the Hindu traditions, Buddhist tradition, Jain tradition, so forth, and rich psychology, the concept on psychology. So because of this, they have their own concepts to share with the world. And when these concepts are conveyed in English, naturally we have to use English words, we have to borrow English words. So we have to keep in mind that what the English word consciousness really means and what this particular word means in the context, how these scholars, they borrow this word to convey their own concepts, we should be very careful. And this is how we can best see the correlations or coming together or the intersection of the different traditions, particularly neuroscience and the ancient traditions. So this is what I would share with you, all the first of all, the speakers. If possible, try to, in your presentations, I request you to make it very clear as to what you mean by the word consciousness, attention, and awareness. With this in mind, each of the speakers will have 25 minutes, and once all the three presentations are done, then I'm being asked, or I'm being assigned to organize or to let two of you have some dialogues. So in which case, you can have, just any question that you might have pertaining to the presentations made by the other two speakers. You have your 1 or 2 minutes to just ask questions, and others will give the response to you. And should there be more time left, then we'll leave it open to the audience. Okay, so this is the basic proceedings. And first of all, I'd like to introduce the speaker one by one, meaning that first I'll introduce the Sister Meera, and then she will make her presentation, and then again the next speaker, and again and then after that, Dr. Clifford Saran. So this is how we're going to proceed. So the first, let me give you a very brief intro of the Sister BK Meera. And Sister BK Meera joined the Brahma Kumari's World Spiritual University at its Mysore branch in 1968, which means the year I was born. And then after completing her Bachelor of Science degree at Mysore University, India, since then she has been holding various positions in the branches of Brahma Kumaris worldwide. At present, she is the director of centers in Brahma Kumari, Malaysia, including Asia Retreat Center, Malaysia. Over a span of more than 50 years, Sister BK Meera has researched intensely into the subject mind-matter relations and is currently an authority in the study of the mind-matter relations. Mind management and spiritual empowerment. She has dedicated her life to world service, traveling extensively to more than 50 countries, and delivering thought-provoking lectures to thousands of people on subjects related to self-development, master of time in life, stress-free living, will to be well, etc. Okay, I invite Sister Meera, 25 minutes. Thank you. Okay, please unmute yourself. Sister Meera, please unmute yourself. Yes.
Om Shanti, greetings of peace and very good morning to everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my thanks to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share some of the wisdom and knowledge I have been practicing and learning over the past more than 50 years in the Brahma Kumari's World Spiritual University. And I think we all know that we are living in an age of information technology. And so we are constantly filled with lots of information through science and technology. It is always said that science has answer for every question in life. Yes, agree, it has answer for most of the questions of the outer world. When it comes to inner world of thoughts and feelings, I think all of us agree that we need to integrate consciousness and spirituality together. I was remembering one of the expression used by Albert Einstein that, science without religion or spirituality is lame, and spirituality without science is blind. So in a way, we need to integrate both together. I was thinking that when we look around in our universe today, we also have two types of energies, physical or material, or spiritual or metaphysical. In fact, when we look at our own self, we are also made up of two types of energies, physical, body, and spiritual, the being. So that is why we are called human beings. In life, many happenings cannot be explained solely in material terms. At certain point of crisis or inspiration, there are deep emotional and spiritual experiences which separates us from the world around. So at that time, we retreat into ourselves, either into religious or philosophical books, into rituals or symbols in order to understand them. So at that time, I am subject to a perpetual commentary on life around me from my own thoughts and feelings. So these faculties of my own thoughts and feelings, ideas, this is from the non-physical, and yet it is real. Indeed, anything perpetual to me comes from two sources. What is detected by the physical senses, what arises from impressions recorded in these subtle faculties. For example, the things that I can see, taste, hear, smell, feel, as well as my body itself is formed of 5 elements, matter. But the subtle faculties, for example, mind, intellect, personality, or sanskaras manifest together is what is called consciousness. So I define consciousness as a manifestation of the subtle faculties, mind, intellect, and personality traits. Consciousness, in other words, in simple words, we call it as a soul or spirit. Now, soul is a subtle entity that cannot be measured by any physical process. The non-physical part of each one of us exists and is in fact the true self, what we call I. This I or soul is possible to understand with the knowing of the mind, intellect, and the sanskaras. I find from my personal experience, one of the basic difference between souls and atoms is that while souls can experience choice of their moments, where to go and when to go somewhere, atoms cannot obviously exercise such a choice. In a way, you could say that soul is a point source of spiritual energy that has awareness of its own existence, whereas atoms do not. So the answer for the question, who am I, is very clear. I am the soul, the living being. The body is the means through which I, the soul, express myself, experience the world around me. So I can say that I am a soul, but I have a body. The two most common words that is being used in our world, in whatever language it could be, is I and mine. I need to understand these deep implications if I want to design my limits. For example, my refers to all the things that are not me. Even the brain is like a computer. My brain, we never use the word me brain. So even the brain is like the computer used to express all the thoughts. And that is why sometimes, from my own understanding and research, I have discovered that brain has very close connection with the existence of the consciousness. And that is why we say that the soul is somewhere in the center of the forehead, but not superficially. But if you dissect 2 inches inside, it's just below the hypothalamus, between the pineal and the pituitary gland. So the consciousness or the soul exists in the brain, but the brain itself is part of the body. So brain can be compared to the computer operating room, but the operator itself is the soul. When you look at this life as a drama, it's also a combination of soul, God, and matter. And all these 3 things are eternal. Even energy, as they say, was never created and energy will never be destroyed. So these 3 energies moves in a cyclic matter, and that we call drama of life. The important aspect I would like to bring here is the eternity of the soul, because the soul is an energy which was never created, which will never be destroyed. And this soul, the consciousness, originated from the supreme abode, as we believe in the Brahma Kumaris, the soul world, where we come down to play our part on this world drama stage. So in the beginning of the cycle of life, the soul, which entered into the body, was in its authentic quality, original, eternal qualities. And so it was aware of itself as a soul. And because of the awareness of the soul, we are able to maintain what we call as soul consciousness. I always look at awareness and consciousness as 2 sides of the same coin. Consciousness cannot exist without awareness. And so when I was aware consciously, subconsciously, or unconsciously in the beginning of the cycle, I was soul conscious. And because I was soul conscious, the qualities, the positive values merged, the authentic, the innate qualities of the soul was reflected in the practical life of people who lived on this earth at that time. So we call it as soul consciousness. And because of that soul consciousness, the positive qualities reflecting, there was total harmony in relationship with people on earth. Not only harmony between human beings, but harmony between nature and animals. And so now, as we went through the cycle of life, the awareness slowly faded, that instead of having the awareness of myself as a soul, the conscious being, I begin to identify myself as the body, what we call it as body consciousness. And as the result of that matter consciousness, so we begin to get influenced by the 7 negative qualities of the body. So what we see in our world in practical today is the negative qualities of greed, anger, selfishness, attachment, all these negative qualities. But in fact, they say that originally we are positive beings, but that positive qualities are merged because of the forgetfulness of the awareness of being a soul. And so what we practice in Raja Yoga is, first of all, to realize who am I, self-realization. Who am I? You know, I have a body, but I am a soul. And soul is a living being with mind, intellect, and sanskaras. When the soul is in the soul world, it is totally peaceful. When it enters the body, it becomes activated. So the subconscious mind influences the conscious mind. And so the behavior pattern keeps on changing. And so through the practice of Brahma Kumari's Raj Yoga meditation, first of all, we try to realize ourselves as to who am I. You know, I am a soul, the awareness of the soul. I become aware, attention is given to maintain the awareness, practicing the maintaining the awareness of the soul. And that helps us to develop soul consciousness. It becomes like a way of life. So when I begin to have that awareness of the soul and soul consciousness as a way of my living, then something happens in our practical life is you begin to, you know, the third eye of wisdom begins to be awakened. So this is my experience also. Awareness of the true self has helped me to awaken my conscience. One is called consciousness, the other is the conscience. Most of the time today in people's life, the conscience is sleeping. And that is why even though they are human beings, but they behave like human doings, no heart, no love. And so this awareness, attention to keep the awareness of myself as a soul, a living energy, helps me to maintain the consciousness that allows me to emerge the positive qualities and particularly activate my conscience. So I begin to lead a life based on values. I begin to lead a life based on wisdom. I begin to lead a life based on knowledge and understanding. So this is what, you know, we call it as divinizing the intellect. And so I am able to maintain inner harmony between the three faculties of the soul. So this awakening of the inner eye, awakening of the wisdom helps us to not only understand ourselves, but it also helps to understand other souls. And so in that way, we are able to live together in harmony. And another thing that I have discovered through the practice of Raj Yoga, as we know, the word yoga means union, union of the soul with the supreme soul. So when my third eye is awakened in soul consciousness, I can connect myself with God, the source of wisdom, the wisdom of the wise, and draw that wisdom into my life. And so I am able to attain mastery over myself. Today, one of the biggest problem in human life is we cannot control ourselves, especially meditation, people always have this complaint of not being able to concentrate. The reason is that, I have not started with the right awareness. I am not maintaining the attention towards the right consciousness. So we emphasize a lot on practicing soul consciousness that leads to God consciousness. And then we are able to bring in that godliness, that divinity in our life. So what I have discovered, very interesting thing, how do we go about creating this self-awareness, true self-awareness? Of course, awareness is the sign of existence, but true self-awareness is the sign of, wisdom, being a wise person. So for that, I just would like to share with you 7 keywords. These 7 keywords, which I have discovered in the Brahma Kumari's Raj Yoga practice, this has helped me to maintain, the consciousness, the real consciousness towards myself, and develop God consciousness so that I am able to lead a life with meaning, purpose, and aim. So the 7 keywords, in short, first of all, one word that would connect with my identity is who am I? The word who. The second keyword is what am I? That's connected with the quality of the soul. And third keyword is where am I? The location in the body. And the fourth keyword is why am I here? The purpose of my existence on this earth. And then 5, when should I understand this purpose? It is connected with the time. And the 6th keyword is how to make this self-awareness a reality. It is connected with the law of karma. And the 7th keyword is again where I have come from, my abode. Because we know that this world is like a drama stage and we are all actors here. And we have come here and we have to go back to our home from where we came from. And so that is very important to know, so that when I am able to connect myself with my home, then I can easily emerge that authentic qualities, and then I'm able to live accordingly. So these 7 keywords, maybe we need to experiment with each keyword, maybe for 7 days, do some research, and then you will find it's very, very interesting. This may not look like something new, but when you go into the research and experience it yourself, you will see the benefits. So in conclusion, what I would like to say is that Brahma Kumari's Raj Yoga teaches us to have attention on the self, to emerge the true self-awareness, the authentic self. In this true self-awareness as a soul, living energy with mind, intellect, and sanskaras, I am able to have soul consciousness, which allows me to emerge the 7 positive values I have within myself, like peace, love, and power. In this self-realization, I can easily connect with the source of peace. When we spend each day practicing soul consciousness and God consciousness, we will be able to transform all the negativity and replace it with the positive values. When each one of us imbibe these values in life and become divine, as we say, the world also becomes heaven. And so that is why the expression that is used in the Brahma Kumaris is, when I change, the world changes. In other words, self-transformation brings world transformation. I hope I have touched on the topic according to my experience, and I'm sure we will be able to experiment with these 3 words from the Brahma Kumari's perspective and bring some newness in your life. Thank you very much for your time and for your patience. Om Shanti.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sister Meera ji. Your presentation is really very lucid, and in fact, I personally learned a lot, particularly how you are connecting the concepts as something which is understandable and something which people can relate to, even if somebody is not following a particular tradition. When they listen to you, I think it is, perhaps it is you because of your background in physics or your background in science back in 1968. Okay, because your presentation is very different. It gives us a sense of, that's something which can relate to myself. For example, like what you refer to as the soul or the self, and then how we tend to move from the soul to the body consciousness, and then particularly how to awaken this, to create this the God consciousness from the soul consciousness, and to be reflective on these 7 points, and to expect to bring about the change in the world only through changing the self. So thank you so much, Sister Meera, and I'm sure the 2 speakers will have questions to you, and for understanding each other's traditions well. Next, I'd like to invite Gishing Awasonamla, the next the presenter. And meanwhile, all the 3 presenters, I request you to make sure that you reserve your questions to the other 2 speakers after the completion of the 3 presentations. So next we have Venerable Gishing Awasonamla, and to introduce him, after doing his primary education, Geshe Awasonam joined Sera Monastery University in 1995 to devote his life to intensive study and practice of Buddhism. He's been formally ordained by Topche Thapor Rinpoche, one of the ex-abbots of Sera Monastery in 1995. Later, he received the highest monastic ordination of Bhikshu from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. As a monk, he has received teachings from 18 highly accomplished Buddhist masters. In 2008, he was selected by the Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to become one of the English translators for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Since then, he has accompanied His Holiness to various places in India and to around 9 countries around the world. Following his more than 20 years of intensive monastic trainings on the 5 major traditions of Buddhism, and upon clearing all the 6 successive years of examination, in June 2019, he was formally conferred the highest degree of Geshe-la-Ramba, traditional degree equivalent to Doctorate in Divinity or PhD, by Giruva Monastic Seat of Learning. In November 2016, His Holiness the Dalai Lama called him to work in his office, and presently he works there as a translator and a Buddhist scholar. Alongside his office work, he also finds time to teach and attend conferences with modern scholars and scientists as a speaker. Okay, so Venerable Geshe Awasonamla, you have 25 minutes, and I'd like to thank Sister Meera ji for keeping your talk in time within the stipulated time, and Geshe Awasonamla, you have 25 minutes. Okay, the stage is yours.
Good morning to all, as well as greetings to others in other parts of the world if they are listening. And thank you for the National Institute of Mental Health for having me here speak on awareness, attention, and consciousness from Buddhist perspective. All right, as Geshe Dorje Damdula has asked us to make the distinction of what consciousness in the context of our own tradition means, I would like to begin with the interpretation or the understanding of consciousness in our Buddhist tradition. So the equivalent that I see in our Tibetan equivalent, the word for consciousness, I believe maybe or is Sheba, being aware or being conscious. And then, so as far as contemporary translation terminology is concerned, broadly speaking, in Buddhism, Buddhism is quite new to the Western world, particularly the English-speaking world, and because of that, the terms that are being used are quite new. They are not so well established as it is in our Tibetan, as well as Sanskrit tradition. So consciousness and mind are synonymous. They mean the same in our tradition. As far as the tradition of Buddhists, Nalanda Buddhists, that we Tibetans practice is concerned, consciousness means simply the mind. Right. And then, all right, now beginning with this, now, before I touch the subject of attention and awareness, it is important to understand that in Buddhism, we do not have the concept of Atma or soul, but we do have the concept of self. And we do have the concept of consciousness, mind and body. Self is postulated or imputed on the basis of mind and body. Now, what do you mean by mind or consciousness? Basically, although there are different ways of interpreting mind in different traditions, in our Buddhist tradition, mind can be understood in two terms. It's on nature, one on the basis of its nature, and another on the basis of its function. So as far as the nature of mind is concerned, it's not material or it's not physical, not so concrete as physical matters, how minute they are, like particles. Mind is not reducible to physical matters. It is non-physical. That's the nature of mind. Having the ability of cognizance, the ability to observe knowledge, observe object, including the mind itself, that is the function of mind. So the ability to observe reality, that's the function of mind. So in gist, mind can be described as a non-physical entity with the ability to observe and register information. So that is the nature of mind. Now, when we say mind, usually people don't tend to think that mind is diverse, that it is a single entity, but mind is actually very diverse. So in Buddhist psychology, mind is not just one entity, but multiple. We have, when we classify minds, broadly speaking, we classify mind as conceptual minds as well as non-conceptual minds. So non-conceptual minds are the minds associated with our senses. The sensorial minds are non-conceptual. The reason why they are non-conceptual is that they interact with the objects directly, whereas non-conceptual mind, to interact with the objects, they need some kind of conceived image of the object. Through the conceived image of the object, we are able to relate to the object conceptually. So when we remember something through the conceived image of the object, you do not need to meet with the object directly. Whereas when you meet with the object directly and are able to experience it nakedly, then it's no more conceptual, so it's non-conceptual. So we have non-conceptual minds or naked or direct perceivers, such as our eye sense faculty, eye sensorial mind, and olfactory, culinary, and so forth. So 5 kinds of senses we all have. Accordingly, we have 5 minds, non-conceptual mind associated with the senses. And beside that, we also have a non-conceptual mind associated with the mental continuum, mental consciousness, it could be non-conceptual, yet non-conceptual, but not non-sensorial. So broadly speaking, 5 sensorial mind and another mind, which we usually refer to as mental consciousness. That is what we call as the 6th mind. So basically, all our experiences at this ordinary level, when we have more meditative experience, most of our mental consciousness are conceptual, and even when we have non-conceptual mental consciousness, it's so brief that within that short span, we are not able to register any information. Things may appear to us, but the appearance remain only at the appearance level. There is no registration of that appearance. So when you have some meditative experiences, then it could be extended to become the non-conceptual meditative mind could actually take root in you, but that's something so difficult. So now, as far as mind is concerned, as we have said, that's one way of classifying mind. Another way of classifying mind is into primary and secondary mind based on the roles that they have. So just like the king and his retinue of ministers, the retinues of ministers, they have their own specific roles, whereas the king has an overall responsibility of the kingdom. Likewise, the secondary minds, or sometimes or mostly referred to as mental factors, they have specific roles in relation to the object, whereas the primary mind, concomitant with these mental factors or secondary minds, they have an overall responsibility. So having said that, now primary mind and secondary minds are applicable to all sensorial and non-sensorial minds. Basically, primary minds, we can distinguish them as being have 5 kinds of primary minds. Secondary minds, of course, sensorial and non-sensorial are there, but basically we speak of like 53 kinds of 51 kinds of secondary minds according to Arya Asanga's interpretation of Abhidhamma. Now, as far as attention and awareness are concerned, as I said, within these 51 mental factors or secondary minds, if I basically count them, then there are 5 omnipresent mental factors, then 5 mental factors with a determinate object, then 6 root delusions, 20 neo delusions, and 10 virtuous mental factors. So from these, there are 5, as I said, 5 omnipresent mental factors. Among these 5 omnipresent mental factors, attention is one. And among the 5 mental factors with a determinate object, then awareness, which is synonymous to mindfulness, awareness is one. So the 5, well, if you need details on these mental factors, then I recommend you to read Science and Philosophy in the Indian Buddhist Classics, which is published in India, and it's available on Amazon. So the 5 omnipresent mental factors are feeling, discrimination, intention, attention, and contact. Then 5 mental factors with a determinate object are aspiration, resolution, awareness, concentration, and wisdom. So they have their own specific roles. I'm not going to go into detail, but in this context, we are speaking of attention and awareness. So as far as the individual role of attention is concerned, is to bring the mind to the object. So in the 5 omnipresent minds, we have intention and attention, which almost have the similar role, but the difference is that intention basically focuses on the generality of the object, whereas the attributes of the object, whether the object is good or bad, and then certain details of the object, to keep the mind focused on that, that is the individual role of attention. And then awareness is concerned. Now, awareness keeps the mind focused on awareness helps the mind to keep focus on the object, not withering or wavering or not faltering from the object. That is the role of the mind. So basically in meditation, what we try to do is we try to cultivate with awareness and or mindfulness. So what we do is there are different kinds of practice, but for people who are not Buddhist generally, or not, yeah, there are practices expounded in Buddhist scriptures, which may be useful. For example, breathing, watching your breath. And the breath actually has no color or shape. So because of that, if you focus on your breath, it helps the mind stay focused and not get distracted. So you breathe, exhale and inhale. So count 1, 1. So this you do 10 countings, not more, because if you get if it continues, then you might fall into laxity, and if and also there is a risk of distraction. So beginning with your breath, if you're able to focus on your breath, if you're able to practice your focus, that helps the mind to calm down, remain undistracted, and also remain alert. So the point of keeping your mind alert and undistracted is so that you're able to focus on anything. Just a minute. Sorry, Job. So that's one way of thinking. And another way of practicing mindfulness is, now you have to see what is the purpose of practicing mindfulness. So the purpose of practicing mindfulness basically could either be to stop your mental excitation or mental distraction, or to reduce your mental anxiety, or so whatever the purpose is. Accordingly, we have different kinds of mindfulness practice. So if it's excessive lust or desire, then you have to think either of your body or others' body as being impure in nature, and as far as your feelings are concerned, then suffering nature of our feelings or the feelings of others. And then as far as mind is concerned, the impermanence nature of the mind. And as far as the self is concerned, then the selflessness of substantially autonomous self, or in other words, the emptiness nature of self. So attachment to oneself is actually one of the roots of our delusions. We are so attached to oneself because we tend to believe there is an eternal or eternally existent or intrinsically existent self, whose who we need to take care of, or whose interests should be preserved. So Buddhist Shakyamuni says such an eternal self doesn't exist. So to practice detachment for oneself, practicing selflessness, the view of selflessness or emptiness is something that is being used by Buddhists, but that's not relevant to the non-Buddhists. But excessive attachment to oneself and others, this also leads to many dangerous activities. So what we do is we think of impermanent nature of our feelings, because based on a feeling, right, then there's an attachment to our feeling, and accordingly, whatever gives rise to our feelings, we feel either if it's a pleasant feeling, then we're attached to it. If it's an unpleasant feeling, then we tend to develop aversion towards that object that triggers our own disappointments. So accordingly, we think of the impermanent nature of the feeling. Then physical body, usually if the physical body is attractive, either because of its appearance, the color, or because of its shape, then we get to feel attached to it, either to our own body or to others' body. So in defense of our own body to which we are attached, we develop anger against others if if the body is being disturbed. So likewise, objects of attachment, physical body outside, we see them as appealing, we see them as very pure. So seeing them the pure nature of the body is something which we deliberately cultivate in order to reduce our attachment. So that is basically to reduce detachment. Now, in order to reduce anger or aversion, then the actual practice is basically a practice of tolerance or tolerance as well as compassion. At the same time, if you're not able to do that, then usually what happens is our own exaggeration of an event, and that leads to our own animosity or grudge. So we tend to reify or exaggerate the event to such an extent, continue looking of that, and our mind becomes one-sided. We remain oblivious to the good things that the person has done to you, or the good qualities that are there in the others. And we also remain oblivious to the consequences of our anger, or destructive nature of anger. So being not mindful of the consequences of anger, we tend to develop anger, because we see anger as a defensive mechanism to protect ourselves. So therefore, it's a natural instinct in us to retaliate when we are being harmed, either verbally or physically. So practicing keeping your peace of mind without developing anger against others, but at the same time, making sure that you yourself are not harmed. That is what we need to try to practice. So according to what your need is, then we have the practice of attention or awareness. So basically, all our anxiety, all our experiences of pain or pleasure, we attribute them to not just this life, but our own past karmas, the latent potentials of or latencies of past karma being carried by our consciousness or our mind onto this life. And if the potentials are strong enough to be triggered by external conditions, then they ripen and we have these experiences. So our concern is not just limited to this life or just futures. It also take into consideration our own past experiences and our past lives. So mind is not reduced to brain matters in Buddhism. One important thing scientists must keep in consideration, of course, we can study a lot about our mind on our brain. Of course, this is something we must do and scientists must do. And that's, I'm sure they're very good at doing that. But at the same time, we must observe if it's the contradictions that arises if the mind is only reduced to brain particles or activity of the brain or inseparable entity of the brain. If that is the case, then a person dies. And if the person is cremated, then there is no continuation of memory. Now, there are thousands of children, not necessarily from Buddhist or Hindu or Jain communities, but from other communities who either have no religion or have Judeo-Christian traditions, recollecting past lives. Children who are not taught anything about their past lives, but whose recollection of past memory are actually very true, although there may be some kinds of some discrepancies or some limitations to their memory, but then there are memories which are so precise, which is actually the case with our own life when we are so much alive. If you go back 20 years, there are things that you remember, but there are things that you vaguely remember. So again, some people say it's just by chance. If just by chance, why can't the child remember the past experience of a living being, a living human being, than a dead person? So this is something you must investigate. If it's because this, I think, the Center for National Institute of Mental Health. You are saying mental health, not brain health alone. So it's actually a broad subject. So mind, if it's reduced to brain, then I feel the scope of studying mind is actually very limited. But if you're able to, if you really want to study mind, then you have to study the meditative experiences of meditators and see, and then see the recollection of their experiences. Whether they are actually, what is the purpose of lying? If they are lying, what is the purpose of lying? And so forth. Some people say is the concentration. Some people develop a lot of concentration, and because of that, they're able to remember and such events. But then, if that is the case, then that remembrance of past occurrences, past of that person, okay, life, how do that experience, those experiences of a deceased person connect emotionally to the child? Because I have seen children, okay, claiming to be some past deceased person. And when you confront them that you are not that person, then they cry. They are emotionally attached to everything that the deceased person was somehow associated with in his previous life. So the emotional attachment, how does that come into being? If it's just recollection by the mere force of concentration of one particular person. So there are things that scientists must explore, not limit mind to brain. But of course, a lot of activities of a mind are observable on the mind, and therefore it is always very good to study the brain, And then now I have how many minutes? Oh, it's only basically, I want to take only 1 minute and then I'll wind up. One of the difficulties we have in controlling our own emotions, the difficulties that we feel mentally is our own kind of too much emphasis on one's own individual interest to the extent that one remains oblivious to the law of dependency, that we are all interconnected. So when you remain oblivious to reality and too much focus on oneself, then if your own personal interest, short interest, is jeopardized, then you are devastated. So practice of compassion, practice of selflessness in Buddhism, as expounded in Buddhism, I think from a to some extent, as a practitioner, as a Buddhist monk, to some extent, I can say it really helps you. It really helps to see beyond yourself. At the same time, it really helps your mental as well as physical health. So with this, I think I have done justice to the time I've been given, and thank you.
Thank you, Gishin. Thank you so much. And your material is really very rich, and particularly things which are of which matters, or which you indicated, and very important, the mind-brain relationship, and how to make this distinction and so forth. This is a huge, huge topic. And in fact, I personally remember that 2 years ago when I was in Israel, there was a conference on consciousness organized by a well-renowned neuroscientist, Israeli neuroscientist, and who is renowned in Europe. And so there, this question came. It was actually attended by many neuroscientists. And there, the debates, it was extremely rigorous debates, head-on debates happening. People throw questions directly on you, they don't really care whether you feel offended. So this is how these debates are going on there. And it was really very enjoyable and thought stimulating. It's extremely stimulating. It was a great, so this kind of thing needs to be encouraged, to really have some dialogues, debates on, people who believe just in brain, everything, reducible to brain, and people believing in the mind, and mind and brain to be different. This is a very interesting topic. And also you brought up some, I'll say, the many functions of the mind. What do you call it? The roles of the mind, and how the mind operates, or how the mind functions in ways to register the information. First, you get information in the form of appearance, perception, whatever, and then the registration. So that you demarcate between the two things. One, the object appearing to you, and you may or may not register that. So if you are more attentive, then the registration happens more strongly. And you made a distinction between the conceptual, non-conceptual. These extremely very important points. Thank you so much. Next, we have Professor Clifford Saran. And again, he's a very renowned neuroscientist, and it's a great honor for all of us. And I'm sure NIMHANS is able to get Professor Clifford Saran through Dr. Ravindra Nagendraji, who met Professor Clifford Saran many years ago. So Professor Clifford Saran is a research scientist at the Center for Mind and Brain and Mind Institute at the University of California at Davis. He received his PhD in neuroscience from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in 1999. Dr. Saran has had a long-standing interest in the effects of the contemplative practice on physiology and behavior. In the early 1990s, he conducted field research investigating Tibetan Buddhist mind training under the auspices of his Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a faculty member at Mandalife Summer Research Institutes in the US and Europe. Cliff has served on many Mandalife Institute planning committees and has served on the steering council. He received an inaugural Mandalife Service Award in 2018. Dr. Saran directs the Shamatha Project, a multidisciplinary longitudinal investigation of the effects of intensive meditation on physiological and psychological processes central to well-being. In 2012, Dr. Saran and his research team were awarded the inaugural Templeton Prize Research Grant in honor of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Currently, his research team is investigating how meditation experience may mitigate the effects of the pandemic on chronic stress and cellular aging, as well as examining consequences of compassion versus mindfulness training on engagement with suffering. His other research area focuses on sensory processing in children with autism spectrum, autism spectrum disorders to better understand how these children experience their everyday sensory environments. Okay, Dr. Saran, thank you so much for you being there. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Dorje, and thank you so much to the organizers of this remarkable inaugural conference of the Center for Consciousness Studies. I'm deeply indebted to my colleagues and co-presenters for presenting an extremely rich set of worldviews that present many avenues of synthesis and challenge to neuroscience. So I want to begin a little bit related to where Geshe Sonam just left off. So I'm going to talk using some PowerPoint for some time. And let's just think about how this very famous image from National Geographic magazine represents two very different worldviews and commitments. One might be the way of neuroscience to understand how brainwave activity we might measure on the surface of the scalp might in some way reflect the inner world or life of the mind of this accomplished meditator. The title of the article that this magazine is putting forward says, "What's in your mind?" as if measuring surface EEG could tell us. So the first thing I'll say is that we still don't know, even with 256 electrodes on a $200,000 machine, what is in your mind. So I want to talk about the social imaginary, which is a concept put forward by the philosopher Charles Taylor at McGill University, because we've been hearing different social imaginaries already in this session. By social imaginary, Charles Taylor writes, "I'm thinking of the ways people imagine their social existence, how they fit together with others, how things go on between them and their fellows, the expectations that are normally met, and the deeper normative notions and images that underlie these expectations." The religious studies scholar David McMahon at Franklin and Marshall has taken the idea of social imaginary and put it within this nested diagram of an individual's beliefs and ethics, all the way up through everything in which they are embedded, including their metaphysical or cosmological worldview. And the fact is that religious traditions, contemplative traditions, and academic disciplines have their own social imaginaries, the way things normally go. So what David McMahon says, particularly when we think about applying the tools of neuroscience to the effects of contemplative practices or meditation or mindfulness, is that the scientific study of contemplative practice neglects often the role of cultural, historical, social, political, religious, and ethical context. Isolating the practices from these contexts for the sake of scientific study may inevitably distort how they actually work in people's lives. So we can't actually make sense of contemplative practice in isolation from these contexts. They are inextricably, systemically intertwined with them. They're part of a particular life world. And we have just in this session listened to two very compelling and strong descriptions of life worlds. So we know that the research on mindfulness has kind of had an exponential turn over the last, say the last 2 decades, particularly in the last 10 years. I began to be involved in about 1992. So we have this exponential growth of publications in peer-reviewed journals. And we also have recently critiques of whether or not the scientific data is painting a clear picture, or it is being either oversold or misinterpreted both within the scientific literature as well as in popular media. So this is a paper in Perspectives in Psychological Science that has gotten a lot of citations in the 3 years it's been out. And there is a view that emerges from the consumption of this kind of scientific view of the science on meditation that Evan Thompson, a cognitive scientist and philosopher at University of British Columbia, talks about the modern mindfulness looping effect. And that is, you conceptualize mindfulness as an inward-looking awareness and regulation of an individual mind. And then we project this conception of the mind onto the brain, having this kind of identity that was cautioned about in the last talk. But if you think about an identity of mind and brain, you endow your experience with a biological reality. And that results in an individualistic conception of a mindful subject or self superimposed on this neural substrate. So this whole construct loops back on yourself so that your sense of who you are becomes reduced to the kinds of caricatures that one hears about brain structures that might be altered by meditative practice or mindfulness. To be a mindful parent, worker, soldier, etc., you need to downregulate your amygdala. This is a very sparse and not very rich conception of the mystery and depth of human existence. So you can look at this book from Oxford University Press that has a number of essays that focus on these issues, including the elaboration by Evan Thompson. So there's another view that I'd like to bring forward that connects to this question of what is mind from a cognitive science, neuroscientific perspective. And that is known as 4E cognition. And I'm going to talk about the 4 E's. And the first is that we are embodied. Our bodies constrain and afford our behavior in the world. And much of our experience is filtered through what it is to be inhabiting this particular form of human being. That body of ours is embedded in our environments. And that embeddedness is not just your physical, local context, but that embedding extends across space and time. Even in this conversation, we are representing at this moment individuals awake in all over the world. And that's part of my experience of this moment. And it's through these embedded, embodied, extended qualities that we enact meaning in every moment. And this entire process is a 5th E. It is evanescent. It's in flux. You can also see a paper by Larry Barsalou that's been very influential called Grounded Cognition that develops this sort of idea. So 2 very recent, one very recent and one slightly older review papers that point to how our current set of experiences that we might be able to understand relate to acts of communication where we create shared worlds by the coupling of our sensory apparatus and the perception of other interlocutors or aspects of the physical environment. We create shared minds through acts of communication. So in moving on, I want to talk about a model that my colleagues and I, Antoine Lutz, Amishi Jha, and the Buddhist scholar John Dunn, developed over some time that tries to put into perspective views from psychological science and neuroscience and the phenomenological or subjective sense of aspects of experience that might be cultivated through contemplative meditative training. The intent of this effort is to take a phenomenological approach, trying to characterize what are the experiences of meditation practitioners, drawing on meditation instructions, teaching from the Buddhist tradition, and current thinking in psychology and neuroscience. This is a heuristic. This is a non-exhaustive, provisional, and subject to refinement. It's a teaching device. So imagine that this cube represents three core aspects of cognitive function intentionally cultivated in many meditative traditions. Let's assume that when we consider a meditator, there is some physical posture, seated, walking, lying down, standing, that there is an intentionality to investigate the nature of experience. One is not being forced or coerced into this predicament, but one is curious and has a non-aversive stance. The third is that there is present, as we've heard in both talks already, an ethical framework that is to heal the world, to make the world a better place, to minimize suffering of self and others. And that there is some technique or practice in which to engage. We'll call that technique an intention retention. So the first axis of this cube is simply the degree to which one is focused on an object. These dimensions may go from 0 to 1, but there is no value judgment attached to any position. It simply describes being highly focused on a single object or having a more broad focus where there is no central object of focus. The second axis is one that actually interrogates the nature of one's self-concept and self-talk and begins to see phenomena in the mind where the thoughts that we think are true representations of reality begin to become more porous. We de-reify our thinking so that we can see the arising and passing away of assumptions we make about the nature of reality. The third dimension is somewhat complex. We call this meta-awareness. And within this context, meta-awareness constitutes the fact that in the presence of focus, the world doesn't just disappear, but you're able to report on other simultaneously co-occurring aspects of experience. You can focus on a beautiful sunset and still be able to report how it felt in your body during that time. Meta-awareness also includes the aspect of monitoring whether you're on an object or not, or the quality of your awareness on an object. In, say, traditional shamatha practice that we'll be talking about, we've heard the term laxity already brought forward. One can be tightly holding onto an object. One can be very dull. One can be very excited by your focus. So there's a whole spectrum of qualities of attention that's included in this term, meta-awareness. Now that cube creates a state space, and each point in the cube we conceptualize as having 4 qualities. The first quality is a sense of aperture. You could be very object focused, but your object might be very wide, like the sky, or very narrow, like focusing on a candle flame. One can have a sense of this metacognition of mental clarity from a kind of dullness, low clarity, sleepiness, to a very vivid, precise perception of your experience. We think of stability as the probability that the next moment of time will find you in the same place in this cube. So if you're new to meditating and your mind is going to wander off, say, an object of paying attention to the breath, you might have a very unstable attention, but with practice, bringing the attention back to the sensations of breathing, you can become more stable. But sometimes aspects of experience are so compelling that you have very stable attention right away, particularly with objects of strong desire. There's a sense of subjective effort as one gets more familiar with practice. Often things become easier. And we can then map mental states into this space. For instance, addictive craving is very stable, but it's very not reified. It's very reified, very low de-reification, high object orientation. When your mind is grabbed, when your attention is grabbed by an object, it doesn't take much effort to keep it there. And there is a high clarity. Rumination, the presence of unwanted thoughts or anxieties, there's some effort associated because one wishes not to have thoughts that are disturbing that spontaneously arise. And often they have a quality of stability and clarity. They are, again, not very de-reified. One of the therapeutic benefits of using mindfulness-based cognitive therapy in treating anxiety and depression is understanding, specifically by direct observation, the insubstantiality of one's repetitive thoughts. And of course, mind wandering is very unstable, again, low de-reification, and it's very effortless. If you think about focused attention meditation, the novice has a lot of effort. It's highly object focused, not much clarity, not much stability. And with practice, you get less effort, more de-reification, more meta-awareness, and more stability. When we think about open monitoring or less object focus practices that cultivate a metacognitive view of the phenomenon of what is arising and passing in the mind, you have a wider aperture, more de-reification, and less object focus. So the utility of this model is to begin to map outcomes of various practices, to motivate the development of experimental designs and tasks relevant to the dimensions, to visualize the trajectories of development, to identify regions of the state space that might be associated with increased psychological challenge, and to inspire further discussion of what's missing. So why am I sitting here? Well, in 1990, I was fortunate enough to attend the third Mind and Life meeting in Dharamsala, filling in at the last minute for Richie Davidson. And I met two deeply influential folks in my life, the neuroscientist Francisco Varela and Alan Wallace. You just saw him last night. This is in 1992. And we undertook a project to begin to use the nascent tools of cognitive neuroscience in an expedition under the auspices of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to investigate mental training in advanced Tibetan monks in Baksu Mountain, north of, just above Dharamsala. So this is something that was life-changing for me. And this is 30 years ago. And here I am still showing images from the monks that engaged us in discussions much like the conversations that we're having today. So in the research project that in the last some few minutes, I'll begin to talk about some of our data. Moving into attention findings, we did a longitudinal study of 3 months of meditation practice that was taught by Alan Wallace. And we used a similar control group of experienced meditators who did a second 3-month retreat. And our emphasis in this project were changes outside of formal meditation sessions. And we are testing the retreat and the control groups in the same way. And we follow them up at 6 months, 1.5 years, 7 years after each retreat. The primary training emphasis taught by Alan was on cultivating relaxation, stability of attention, and perceptual clarity through shamatha practices. And there were ancillary practices promoting beneficial attitudes for self and others. So what do we want to find out in this project? Can attention be trained through systematic meditation practice? Can training in compassion and loving kindness increase emotion regulation, compassion and well-being? Or improvements in attention related to positive emotional and psychological function? And what are the behavioral, neural, and physiological correlates of such training? So this happened in 2007, and believe it or not, we're still analyzing data from this project. We had 2 3-month retreats. We flew the second retreat group in. These were randomly assigned to the first or second retreat. So we have a control group not in retreat that then can be its own within subjects control group for themselves when they go on retreat later. We had tremendous retention. We have these follow-up time points. So we were doing mindfulness of breathing, Alan taught, observing mental events, and awareness of awareness. These are the 3 shamatha practices Alan taught. And they're described in this book, The Attention Revolution. And he led guided meditations in loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. These are described in the 4 measurables. This is an enormous project. It has a huge bevy of researchers, consulting scientists, trainees, students, collaborating investigators at Davis and around the world. And this has had tremendous funding across the last 15 years. So here in Colorado, the Shambhala Mountain Center, where we undertook this project, there was a meditation lodge. Everybody had their own room. There was Alan teaching in the second retreat. We had 2 university-grade laboratories we built downstairs. There were many different kinds of tasks related to attention, emotion, interviews, questionnaires, data during meditation, many different dependent measures from facial expression of emotion to 88-channel EEG, heart rate and skin conductance. At this point, we have 13 empirical papers from the project. So I'll just begin talking about some of the attention effects, since this is a term for the meeting today. So if you're going to spend 3 months focusing your mind, we want to give you a tough test of attention. And to do that, we present a dot to fixate on, and then you're going to see a long line that's going to appear. Then the line will go away, and about 1.5 seconds later, you'll get another line, and maybe that line is short. And your job is either to, in one version of the task, you press a button when it's a short line. 90% of the time, it is not a short line. And the short lines do not look this short compared to the long line. We actually make the short line longer and longer and longer until it matches your visual perceptual threshold, where you can only tell if it's short about 75% of the time. So the task itself is masked and it kind of looks like this. Can you quickly tell, is that a short line or a long line compared to this? We then, having measured a person's visual perceptual threshold in an uninterrupted task for 32 minutes, we ask people to respond whenever they see a short line. No breaks for half an hour. We also flip that around and we say, okay, respond every time it's not a short line. That's 90% of the time. When you see a short line, withhold your hand. That's a response inhibition task, kind of related to one's executive control, one's capacity to overcome a habitual response tendency. So what did we see? In the first retreat, we actually found that visual discrimination improved by the midpoint of the retreat. There was no difference between controlled group, and as we made a higher threshold at the beginning. For the first retreat, the control group had took a larger difference between long and short for the control group to report a short line. The meditation training improved visual perception, and that was so 6 months after the retreat. When the control group went into their own retreat, we replicated this same pattern. What this meant is that not just that their attention was getting better, but their perception was getting better. So if we kept making their visual perceptual threshold changing to how their visual capacity was, we kept giving them a harder task across the experiment. In the second retreat, we kept the threshold the same at the beginning, and we found by midpoint of the retreat, this is the first 15 minutes of the retreat, of the task, there was an increased capacity to be vigilant from the midpoint, from pre to midpoint, and at the end of the 3-month training. These lines are the same participants when they did this task as control participants and at the beginning of their 3-month retreat. And we have found event-related potential evidence that mirrors this finding behaviorally using brainwave event-related potentials, where each 4-minute block at the beginning of the retreat, this is the global field power, the standard deviation of the voltage changes across the scalp. That is an index of the overall cortical activation elicited by this stimulus in this task. And as people go on in those 32 minutes, there is less decrease in the amplitude of that response at the mid-training and at the post-training. And so the brain activity mirrors the behavioral pattern. Now I am essentially out of time with more to talk about. So I think I'll just leave you there with methods of looking at attention. But I will give you one super quick additional piece of information, and that is we were able to connect improvements in this capacity of being able to withhold your response repeatedly to improvements in self-reported psychological adaptive functioning. We combined together increases in psychological well-being and measures of anxiety and attachment and difficulties in emotion regulation, depression and anxiety. And it turns out these improved in the retreat compared to the control group in the first retreat, was replicated in the second retreat. And this improvement in response inhibition was actually related and predicted the improvements in self-reported psychological function. So this connects psychological well-being with this very low-level cognitive task of simply being able to overcome habitual response tendencies, which is actually often part of spiritual teachings and the fruits of contemplative practice. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saran, for your brilliant presentation and all your data given to us. And very interesting, like 256 electrodes put in the brain, put on your skull. And
yeah, that's Richie's, not mine.
Yeah, so we cannot see what is still there. And then the 4 E's is very interesting. And of course, your research is a huge research and gathering data. You're still in the process of gathering data. So this is, and what I particularly like, the one thing from what you said, is that when you did the research, you are not just doing something as overall research, but being very precise with the aperture, the clarity, the stability, the effort, and then you are really seeing each of these facets in the great detail. So this is something which is very important. And for the research, I think as for the aperture, I think again there can be different angles. So the vast like the universe, or the huge sky to the tiny flame, or like the very gross information like 2 + 3 = 5 versus emptiness. So again we can see things.
Yes.
These are all different ways of looking at things. So I don't want to take much of your time. And thank you so much, Dr. Saran. Your presentation is so lucid and a lot of information, and did your research so meticulously in collaboration with many scientists, contemplatives, and so forth. And as you beautifully said, that finally the purpose of all these must be to bring about a compassionate world, be it from the scientific the realm, or from the Brahma Kumari tradition, or from the Buddhist tradition, or any other tradition. We should not forget the main goal, that with all these data, with all these meticulous research, philosophical discussions, and so forth, it is to bring about the harmony of the world, peace of the world, and the people should suffer less. This should be our goal. So with this in mind, I'd like to, first of all, given that all the 3 presenters, you came up with your the points which are quite tangible, I would say. So the first, I would just ask if the later 2 presenters, like Professor Clifford and Venerable Geshe Sunamla, you have any questions to Sister Meera? And I request you to make your questions very precise. Yes, Geshe Sunamla.
Sister Meera, good morning. And my question for you is, you have spoken of consciousness as being same to soul, and then you have spoken of the awareness of the soul as contributing to the awareness of external world. So just a question about this is, if the awareness of if you're aware of something, for example, if you know everything about something, or conscious of something, that's soul, then soul and our physical world basically different, right? Distinct. So how would that, for example, sometimes, for example, if you are too concentrated on your own family members, and then it could also have the adverse reaction, because of being too focused upon oneself, to preserve the interests of one's own group, then you remain oblivious to the sufferings or concerns of others. Likewise, if you're too focused on yourself, all right, then how does that contribute to concern for others?
Actually, yoga practice teaches us to keep the balance. It's an art of balance. Just like body and soul. When you give too much attention to the body and neglect the soul, it suffers. And when you give too much attention to the soul and not look after body, also not good. See, this is the misunderstanding people have nowadays. When they say though so-and-so is spiritual, there is a misunderstanding. They think they neglect the physical aspect, but that's wrong. Spirituality teaches us the balance, because it is a combination of physical and spiritual energies working together, isn't it? What happens to my mind affects my body. What happens to the body affects my mind, and so on, same thing. What happens to my relationships affects my mind. And so what we believe is that we need to keep a balance. Don't go to the extreme of anything. So when we lead a life of balance, like for example, love and law. So sometimes law is love and sometimes love is law. Detachment and loving. So when we have that kind of balance, we get two benefits. One is you experience bliss in your life, and that balance you maintain actually brings blessings from others. And so it's not going into the extreme. We must have the balance of the physical and materialistic life. In fact, WHO, World Health Organization, defined health as the 4 dimensions, not even 2, balance of 4 dimensions: physical, mental, social, and spiritual. So only when there is the 4-dimensional balance is maintained, that is called positive health. So I don't think in Brahma Kumaris we talk about going to the extreme, because it teaches us a lot of love, compassion, care, and share. And so we see others as we see ourselves. So that much importance is given to others as much as you give to yourself.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Saran, you have a question? Yes.
Yes, Sister Meera, I have a question about being how it is that the Brahma Kumaris can localize the non-physical entity that is soul to a physical location in the brain. And that's part 1. Part 2 is what is the interaction and the basis of the interaction of that consciousness onto the tissue.
I have not done research on the tissue aspect, but what I can just say is that, the consciousness has 3 faculties, isn't it? Mind, intellect, and personality traits. So from time to time, the impressions, the personality traits are activated on the basis of our external stimuli. So what we see, what we hear, we don't even know that we have that trait inside of us. Consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously, we don't know. But the moment I am coming in contact with the world, I see something, I hear something, it's triggered. And then when I'm not able to identify it properly, sometimes, we, without knowing, we put it into action. And sometimes it can become a reaction. And it creates a bad karma for ourselves. And then we begin to regret. So what Raj Yoga teaches us is that when you get thought in your mind, all your thoughts that comes in your mind is based on your subconscious mind, because subconscious mind is a reservoir of thoughts. So you use your intellect to judge whether it is coming from your subconscious mind or whether it is coming from your conscious mind. So if it is coming from your subconscious mind, we call that as body consciousness. And so it will always have some ingredient of negativity inside, selfish motive, self-centric, whatever. So then I talk to myself. I have a dialogue with myself, my mind, my intellect, and I convince my mind and allow the mind to work together with me. So there is an harmony, no conflict. So this is why we believe that soul conscious practice. I am a soul, a living energy with mind, intellect, and subconsciousness is very, very vital for us to live in harmony with ourselves, live in harmony with others. Now, my own experience is that when I come in contact with people, no matter what their behavior is, but if you look at them as you see yourself, as a soul, a living energy, pure and positive, so the response to you also becomes positive. But when I begin to have a limited vision and I begin to see their color, their religion, their nationality, you build a bridge, you build a kind of a barrier. And then the conflict begins. So we believe that, the only solution to finish all the conflicts in the world is universal brotherhood. Embrace the people of the world as one member of the family. So love prevails and conflict finishes.
Okay, Sister Meera, thank you so much. Sister Meera, just, I have a confusion. I'm a little lost when you presented the soul entering the body. Before the soul enters the body, is that perfectly pure or not pure? If
Yes,
it's perfectly
it is
pure,
perfectly pure in the soul world.
Exactly. Then
in the soul world, what you call nirvana or brahmanda or the seventh heaven, whatever name people gave.
Yes.
In that region, all souls are pure. Pure.
My question is that then so when we die, then we take another body, again we go to the soul.
Yes. No, we don't go to that. This is something new concept maybe. According to the law of the drama of life, once the soul comes onto the drama stage, it cannot go back in between. It has to stay until the end of the drama, when God comes to guide us back home. So, because we know that karma and drama are two sides of the same coin.
So why my question, this is really big confusion to me. Why this very pure soul sent to the bad body? Why not to a clean body?
No, it is in the beginning, it was clean body only. When the new souls come, they don't come into dirty body. The world cycle has 4 parts: golden age, silver age, copper age, and iron age. So when any soul comes, even if the soul comes today in the iron age, it will enjoy golden age. It will enjoy good body because it is pure. But all the souls have to go through 4 stages. As they say in Bhagavad Gita, Sato Rajo Tamu. So it has to go through stages. So by the time it goes through the tamo stage, the body has become dirty because the soul has been performing action. And there are 3 types of action we perform: akarma, sukarma, and vikarma. Bad action, good action, and neutral action. And so the karma determines our birth. And so we are responsible for making our body dirty due to our actions. But in the beginning, when the soul comes from the soul well, it comes into the clean body.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a little bit digression. So when my soul entered into the mother's womb, genetically there are so many errors there. So what's the problem?
No, the reason is that your karma determines where you are going to take the body, isn't it? So according to your karma, you come into that kind of body. If I have brought the account of bad karma into if I have done something bad karma, I come into the body maybe without, I am blind, I am deaf. My parents are okay. When I entered into the womb of the mother's womb is okay. But I have a blind body because of my karma. So parents are not responsible. I am responsible.
Thank you, Sister Meeraji. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to quickly invite Sister Meera and the Dr. Clifford, if you have questions to Venerable Geshe Namla. Sister Meera first.
I don't have any special questions, to be honest.
Okay, thank you, Sister Meera. And Dr. Saron?
So I deeply appreciate this clear exegesis of Tibetan Buddhist conceptions of mind, and being in the dialogue with His Holiness about science and Buddhist views of mind for many years. There's always been a tendency to bracket the questions of reincarnation. And in your case, it was a moment of contact, not a comfortable moment, but a moment of contact in listening to you and the challenge that you present with respect to studying these phenomena, because in the scientific social imaginary, reincarnation is not part of the model of understanding, though in theory, empirical methods could be used to adjudicate veridical reports from ones that are a function of incidental learning. One of the things that it's hard to appreciate is how much information is being absorbed by young children that they can then be attached to and report and imagine. And so the tests to rigorously adjudicate a confabulated versus authentic story really have a very high bar in Western science. The phrase extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. In this Western scientific view, what you have said is an extraordinary claim, but it's not an extraordinary claim at all in your world. The opposite is the case, where our claim of emergent phenomena from brain activity embedded in a physical world, giving rise to all of the aspects of experience, that's the radical claim. So we actually are joined in the parallelity of our radical claims, which I think is a cool thing. So I don't really have a question.
Yeah, this is not a question. Yeah.
I have a few questions from the audience. One from Umar Ramanathan. who's an advocate and mediator who believes in handling conflict by using Indian thought process. She's asking, change of individual being the core of sustainable harmony, how do we inculcate awareness and attention to thought vrittis to bring about consciousness of swabhava?
So,
Any of the three speakers?
first, what is Sabhava?
Swabhava is the behavior.
All right, okay. I'm not going to touch the religious element, all right. Most important thing is we are human beings with intellect far more superior than many of the living creatures that we tangibly see around us. So now, and then again, we have a common kind of convention on which we all agree. Whether something is good or bad, we have, no matter whatever language or cultural differences we have, or which part of the world we come from, whatever upbringing are, we have a common kind of a consensus on which we all agree that this is good or this is bad. Something tangible, undeniably, we have a general convention based on which we agree that this is it and this is not it. So because of that, we have this kind of conference. So based on our own common experience, common sense, then we use discernment, analyze whether your own individual behavior, which is prompted basically by some strong emotions, whether that's going to benefit you right now and in the long run. And also by harming others. Aren't you actually causing damages to yourself, not just others, but by acting very badly towards others? So sense of concern for others, compassionate attitude towards others is basically the first beneficiary of your good behavior towards others is you yourself, because you feel sense of kind of contentment that you have done the right thing. And then with that kind of positive attitude towards others and in a spirit of transparency, you have nothing to hide. So naturally confidence will be built. So when you are basically confident and if you have nothing to hide, then your mind works better. So basically in Buddhism, what we call is the combination of wisdom and compassion. So compassion is not blind. It actually takes into consideration the whole range of realities which are highly interconnected. Nowadays, world, Eastern, Western, whatever, economically, socially, geographically, we are all interconnected. So the concern of others is your concern, because eventually it will bounce back on you. So with this kind of discernment, I think you can improve your behavior, no matter whatever religious traditions you follow or not. Even if you don't have religion, you have human sense.
Okay.
So this is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to add a little bit. Actually, what I understand is whatever happens in anyone's life at any time, there is a reason. And so that's why there is a law, natural law of action. Action and reaction are equal and opposite. It's something very much connected with your karma and destiny. So if I have done something to someone, today or tomorrow, I will get back the same result. So if I have thrown white ball towards someone, that same white ball will come to me. So if I take the responsibility for myself being the cause for that situation, I will improve. But if I point my fingers towards the other one that they are responsible, I can never improve. I can never create my destiny. So one needs to think a little bit more deeper about the karma and the destiny that we create for ourselves.
Thank you.
We have one more question from Saket.
Yes.
It goes like this. Raja Yoga talks about soul and Buddhism. Raja Yoga talks about soul and Buddhism talks about no soul. How do we reconcile these two? Is this just language, like how we misinterpret consciousness based on which perspective we talk about?
I think it's just the language, but all of us believe that we are a combination of two types of energy, physical and spiritual, right? Whether you call mind or soul, consciousness or body, doesn't matter. But it is just a matter of language and explanation. But deep down within ourselves, we know that we are two types of energy, thinking, intellect, mind, and memory, and then body, which is physical and spiritual energy. I think it is just a matter of expression of the language, explanation that is given, but inside is the two types of energy that makes our life on earth. That's what I feel.
Yeah, slightly, I want to, I beg to differ slightly. The aim of our life, wherever you are, is to lead a happy life. So on that basis, our actions need to be ethical in every sense for yourself, for others. So the view underlying, the view that underpins our own behaviors may be different, but the behaviors, our own ethical and way of living and approach to others, if they are good, then from that perspective, on that level, there's no problem. Now, basically, we have different levels of intellectual capability, social upbringing, different secondary differences. So I don't think basically the concept of Atma and Anatma basically contradictory as far as I see it. One is existence of a concrete self. One is non-existence of a concrete self. So opposite, mutually exclusive. But despite that, we have to look at what is the purpose of these two dichotomical kind of more inconsistent view. The purpose is to promote good human values within yourself, in your society. So no matter whatever approaches there are, whether it's religious approach or whatever kind of religious or non-religious, people who don't believe to any religious tradition, and if it's a scientific tradition that promotes, what we need to promote our own well-being as well as the well-being of our immediate neighbors, and then our own nation and also the whole globe. So from that perspective, as far as the aim is concerned, then there is no contradiction.
Thank you.
So due to shortage of time, we would be posting the questions to the speakers. So we would like to wind up.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Bindu Kudiji. Dr. Bindu Kudiji, who is the professor and the officer in charge of the Center for Consciousness Studies. She's behind all these wonderful researches done. And this conference, Dr. Bindu Kudiji is behind all these. So thank you for your wonderful leadership. And thank you all the participants, all the speakers, and Dr. Suma, and Dr. Ravindra Nagendraji, and all those in the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
I would
Thank you.
also like to.
Thank you so much.
So thank you so much for chairing the session, Vishela. And thank you all the speakers for enlightening us with your brilliant talks, and also for this active participation in this lively discussion, because our center needs all these perspectives. We just wanted to learn from different perspectives, and then we wanted to integrate all this information to have a coherent understanding on consciousness. So that is the mission of our center, and we will definitely keep in touch with you all And very nice meeting you all online. And I would like to just show my group because they're all here. Just to come this side, Ravindra. So all of them are my younger colleagues who will be taking, so the center depends upon all these youngsters. He is Dr. Arun, this Arun Ramajayam, Rahul, Ravindra, Neeti, some more students are there. Suma is representing them. So thank you so much from CCS.
Great. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Gisela.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to announce that I would like to remind you all that the next session, that is the keynote from Swami Atmananda, will start in another few minutes. That is at 11:45 a.m. Indian Standard Time. Please stay connected.
And thank you all the participants. Please stay connected. We are going to have one more